You know how in Formula One, the tiniest decision can flip the entire championship upside down? That's exactly what just happened with McLaren. On the surface, it looked like a simple team order. Oscar Piastri was told to move aside and let Lando Norris through at Monza, but when you peel back the layers, it wasn't just another team call. It was a crack in the foundation of McLaren's philosophy, and that ripple could grow into a tsunami by the time we reach Abu Dhabi. Let's rewind for a second. Monza is traditionally Red Bull territory. Long straights, low downforce, and all about straight line with speed. But this year, everyone expected McLaren to come in swinging. They'd been looking sharp and consistent, and with Red Bull having some recent hiccups, this was supposed to be McLaren's golden weekend. Except Max Verstappen had other plans. The man turned back into a machine, broke lap records, and basically reminded everyone why he's still the king. But as wild as Max's dominance was, that's not what people were talking about after the race. Instead, all eyes turned to McLaren, specifically their decision to ask Oscar Piastri to give up second place to Lando Norris in the final laps. And yeah, that single call set off a firestorm. Here's how it all played out. McLaren ran a risky pit strategy. They delayed both pit stops late into the race, banking on a potential safety car to gain time. Norris actually requested that Oscar pit first. The team obliged. And to be fair, it worked for a second. Oscar came out clean, but then Lando's stop got botched. A delay with the wheel gun cost him around 4 seconds, which dropped him behind Piastri. Now at that point, Oscar had earned second on track. Simple, he was ahead. Clean stop, no drama. But then came the radio message: swap positions, let Lando through. Why? McLaren's reasoning: Lando had been ahead for most of the race and deserved the place, but to Oscar and to a lot of fans watching, it just didn't add up. A slow pit stop is part of racing. That's not the trailing driver's fault. That's just the game. And to ask someone to give up a podium spot because their teammate's stop didn't go as planned, that's where the story shifts from strategy to favoritism. Oscar wasn't exactly thrilled. You could hear it in his voice over team radio. He reminded them they had agreed that slow stops were fair game, something both drivers acknowledged earlier in the season, but still, he complied. He let Lando by, no arguments after that. Publicly, he stayed diplomatic, said it was fair, said he didn't regret it, but you can't help but wonder, deep down, how did that really feel? Because here's the thing, Oscar Piastri is no longer the quiet rookie. He's a serious title contender. Before Monza, he was leading Lando by 31 points in the championship. That's not nothing. And every single point counts now. Giving up 6 points might not sound huge, but if this title fight comes down to the wire, and it will, those 6 points could decide everything. What's wild is that this isn't just a case of internal politics or awkward PR. It's a genuine test of McLaren's values. They've always prided themselves on fairness, on giving both drivers equal footing. They even coined papaya rules, their internal code of conduct for equal treatment. But when push came to shove at Monza, it sure didn't feel equal. It felt like those rules suddenly had exceptions. If there was ever a moment that tested Oscar Piastri's patience, it was that Sunday at Monza. And not just because of the swap, it was the principle behind it. The message was subtle but powerful. Mistakes from the pit wall can be covered, but only if you're not the junior driver. And in this case, Oscar was left holding the short end of the stick. What makes it more complicated is that this wasn't the first time McLaren pulled something like this. Last season in Hungary, they had Lando move aside to let Oscar go on and take his first win. That worked out fine because it made tactical sense. The threat from behind was real, Oscar had pace, and Lando followed the team call. No one blinked. But in Monza, there was no genuine threat. No DRS train breathing down their necks, no Ferrari or Mercedes driver clawing for position, just two McLaren teammates, one unlucky with a pit stop, the other ahead on merit. And the team flipped the positions anyway. And that's where the whole thing starts to feel less like a strategy call and more like a narrative push. Lando is the face of the team. He's been with McLaren longer, has the fan base, the personality, the media presence. Oscar was he's the quiet assassin. person. Fast, focused, and maybe too chilled for the headlines, but when it comes to raw performance, he's delivered consistently. So when the team favors Lando in a moment like that, even if unintentionally, it sends a message, not just to Oscar, but to the entire paddock. What really raised eyebrows was how everyone outside the team reacted. Verstappen's race engineer couldn't help but chuckle when he heard the news. Max himself responded with that trademark disbelief, almost sarcastic. Huh? Just because he had a slow stop? That reaction wasn't just shade, it was a reality check. Because no one at Red Bull, Ferrari, or Mercedes would expect their drivers to give up places over a botched pit stop. That's not how title fights are won, that's how you lose them. Then there was the crowd. Lando took the podium to a mix of cheers and boos, something rare for the usually adored Brit. Lando had perpetuated the Bill arrival, from pandering to a new ring of fame. Now all the Bills are in his DMs, something rare for the usually adored fans might not always get the full picture, but they recognize fairness. And on that day, they didn't see it. Even Toto Wolff, not one to miss a chance to stir the pot, chimed in. He didn't outright call it a mistake, but his words carried weight. You set a precedent that is very difficult to undo, he said, and that's exactly the point. If McLaren can switch places over a pit stop, what's next? Do you do it again if one driver gets unlucky in traffic? Do you start favoring based on who's better at press conferences? There's a deeper issue here, trust, between driver and team, between teammates. Oscar might have been diplomatic in public, but he didn't forget what was agreed. When he said, "We said a slow stop was part of racing," it wasn't just a casual remark. It was a reminder that he was sticking to the script. But the team, in that moment, wasn't. The unspoken question hanging in the air now is this: if the roles had been reversed, would Lando have done the same? Would McLaren have asked him to move aside, and would he have agreed without a fight? Hungary last year showed us how hard it was to get Lando to comply, even with repeated requests. That contrast isn't lost on anyone watching closely. McLaren's internal code, those so-called papaya rules, were supposed to be about clarity, no ambiguity. Both drivers knew the expectations going in. You race hard, you race fair, and you accept the variables of motorsport, whether it's a gust of wind or a sticky wheel nut. But Monza shattered the illusion that those rules are applied equally. In that moment, one driver's misfortune became another's responsibility. Oscar Piastri could have easily kicked up a storm. He had every right. A podium position on merit was taken away with a simple radio call. But instead of drama, he kept it cool. No cryptic tweets, no passive-aggressive interviews. He played the long game. And maybe that's the most dangerous thing of all, for McLaren and for Lando. Because drivers like Oscar, the ones who remember everything and say nothing, tend to strike when it matters most. That calm exterior doesn't mean he's forgotten. It means he's calculating, watching, learning. If Monza taught him anything, it's that being the nice guy only works until someone rewrites the rules mid-race. The next time he's asked to step aside, maybe he won't. Maybe he'll remember how quickly the team bent for the bigger brand. Maybe he'll decide that if he wants to win, he has to take control of his own story. On the flip side, Lando Norris has been handed something just as dangerous: expectation. The moment the team favored him, intentionally or not, the pressure doubled. If he now goes on to beat Oscar in the standings, there will always be an asterisk, an unspoken whisper that one of those wins came with help. And if he doesn't beat Oscar, then what was the point? The assists at Monza will look like charity, not strategy. And then there's the title fight itself. 8 races left, 31 points separating the two. The math is simple. If Oscar keeps finishing just behind Lando, he still takes the title. That's how big his lead is. So what happens if Monza was the turning point? What if that 6-point swing becomes the exact margin by which Lando edges out Oscar in Abu Dhabi? Will anyone remember the tire gun failure, or will they remember that McLaren stepped in mid-race and chose a side? That's the kind of narrative that lingers, not just in post-race analysis or YouTube comment sections, but in contracts, sponsorships, and future team dynamics. Because once a team shows its hand, future drivers take note. They remember who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. And when silly season rolls around, those reputations matter. The real concern for McLaren now isn't just managing their drivers, it's managing their image. They've built their comeback story on unity, innovation, and young talent. But moments like Monza make people question that foundation. Fans start wondering if the orange garage is really as balanced as it claims, and rival teams start looking for cracks. Formula One isn't just a race, it's a sport of perception, and perception can snowball. One bad call leads to tension, tension leads to hesitation, and hesitation kills pace. If that happens, it won't matter how talented Lando or Oscar are, the team will implode from within. Oscar's already shown he can go wheel to wheel with anyone on the grid. He doesn't need handouts, and if McLaren's leadership is smart, they'll make sure he never feels like he's racing alone. Because the day he stops trusting the voices on the radio is the day McLaren stops being a team and starts being two cars in matching paints. That's not a championship-winning formula, that's the start of a civil war. And if the gap tightens in the final stretch of the season, we might not just be watching a title battle, we might be watching McLaren break itself from the inside out.